The world is changing. Economic power is shifting, and new alliances are reshaping the global order. At the heart of this transformation is India. One question rises above the noise. How did India achieve this, and what does it mean for the world? This is not a passing headline, not a seasonal spike of attention. It is a signal that the story of power is being rewritten, and 1 billion people are turning the page together. For years, the narrative felt familiar. A nation with limitless potential, but framed by poverty, overpopulation, and impossible complexity. A sleeping giant, they said, as if sleep were destiny. But giants do not sleep forever. They prepare. Quietly, methodically, India built, brick by brick, policy by policy, a long march through reform, infrastructure, and human capital. In labs with second-hand benches and first-rate minds, scientists stretch budgets and imaginations. In startups born in dorms and backrooms, entrepreneurs wrestled with scale and created it. On fields that fed cities, farmers kept the economic engine steady. In classrooms and coaching centers, millions learned to dream in code and calculus, in law and literature, in the language of possibility. India's rise did not arrive as a miracle. It arrived as a plan. Resilience written into policy. Ambition woven into institutions. 1 billion acts of persistence becoming one story. And listen closely, the words have changed. Where there was struggle, there is strategy. Where there was chaos, there is capacity. Where there was potential, there is performance. Innovation is no longer a borrowed idea. It is a domestic habit. Affordable interplanetary and lunar missions. A digital identity stack connecting millions to services, payments at a scale few imagined possible. As per reports, outcomes once called improbable are now case studies taught worldwide. In an interconnected age, no achievement is local. Governments, corporations, and think tanks study the implications. Trade corridors and tariff maps, semiconductor bets and critical minerals, energy security and climate commitments, data governance and digital public goods, security architectures from the Indian Ocean to the Indo-Pacific. The calculus of influence is changing. The world is becoming truly multipolar, not by proclamation, but by performance. Consider technology. What began as a service economy matured into a creator's ecosystem. World-class engineers, researchers, and builders, at home and across the diaspora, are setting standards in software, AI, biotech, space, and clean energy. This is India's edge, scale with inclusion. Solutions are designed not only to be elegant, but to be equitable. A digital backbone enabling identity, payments, and access, built to carry the weight of millions and the hope of billions. Innovation here is not a luxury, it is a necessity to bridge distances, languages, and incomes, to make citizenship tangible. The economy tells the story in numbers and in narratives. A vast consumer base with rising aspirations, a young workforce learning fast, adapting faster, reforms that unclogged old bottlenecks, new corridors of logistics and manufacturing, a startup landscape that blends frugality with audacity. Global corporations no longer see India merely as a market. They see a partner in design, in production, in research, in talent. Supply chains diversify, and India becomes a strategic node. The phrase "Made in India" gathers meaning, not as a slogan, but as a capability. Diplomacy, too, has changed tone. In forums where agendas are set, G20, BRICS, the Quad, India stands as a bridge between the developed and the developing, between historical power and rising aspiration. Its voice carries, not because it is the loudest, but because it is grounded in pluralism, in constitutional debate, in the lived reality of managing diversity at continental scale. On climate, it argues for responsibility with room to grow. On security, for stability without domination. On trade, for openness with fairness. On technology, for innovation with trust. This is not diplomacy of posture, it is diplomacy of purpose. There was an old assumption: to develop at scale, one must centralize. To move fast, one must silence dissent. India tests that assumption every day. Democracy here is not neat. It is noisy, contested, alive. Yet within that noise, a pattern emerges, an insistence that growth must carry rights with it, that prosperity and liberty can advance together. Not perfectly, not always, but persistently. For developing nations, the message is electric. It is possible to rise without surrendering your core, to blend tradition with technology, sovereignty with cooperation, identity with openness. Look beyond the graphs and speeches. See the hands that built this ascent. A scientist calibrating a sensor at midnight, a coder pushing the last test before dawn, a farmer who knows the monsoon by scent, balancing risk with courage, a teacher in a crowded classroom, igniting first-generation ambition, a nurse in a rural clinic, turning policy into survival. Add to them millions of migrants who remitted hope, millions of women who built households and businesses in tandem, millions of youth who spoke the language of the future before the future learned to answer. This is the resilience of a billion people, refusing limits, rewriting expectations. Alliances adjust. Partnerships once symbolic become strategic. Countries that underrated India revisit the math. Europe seeks resilient supply. America, trusted talent and tech. Asia, stable corridors and shared security. Even long-standing alignments are re-examined because India's rise introduces a variable that cannot be ignored. A nation large enough to matter, principled enough to trust, ambitious enough to lead. The balance of power is no longer a narrow seesaw. It is a wide table, with India choosing a seat and often arranging the chairs. For centuries, legacy wrote the rules. History granted influence. Maps conferred power. But the 21st century tests a different metric: performance. India's signal to established powers is simple. Relevance is earned, not inherited. Prestige without delivery is ceremony. Delivery without prestige is momentum, and momentum changes the world. So why does this moment resonate far beyond India's borders? Because it expands the horizon of possibility. Because it invites other nations in Asia, Africa, Latin America to imagine leadership without imitation. Because it proves that development can be both modern and moral, strategic and democratic, ambitious and inclusive. And because it suggests a new template for power, not a fortress that excludes, but a platform that enables. India's vision is not a victory lap. It is a construction schedule. Invest in education that outlives political cycles, in infrastructure that survives monsoons and decades, in research that fails often until it succeeds decisively, in institutions that welcome argument because truth is sharpened by debate. The road ahead will not be smooth. No rise ever is, but the compass is clear: long-term over short-term, capacity over spectacle, service over swagger. This is not just India's triumph. It is a mirror held to the world. To rivals, intimidation will not substitute for strategy. To allies, partnership will be mutual, not deferential. To developing nations, leadership is within reach, without surrendering identity. To citizens everywhere, the measure of a nation is not the volume of its claims, but the evidence of its work. The headlines will fade. The work will not. Because this is not a story of arrival. It is a story of becoming. The giant was never sleeping. It was preparing. And now the world must answer its own question. In a century shaped by performance, vision, and determination, how far can India go? And who will choose to rise beside it?